Hey, welcome back to another episode on how to make wooden climbing holes. In today's episode I'm going to make fairly simple shapes. I'm going to make a pair of symmetrical jugs and a pair of symmetrical pinches. Right now you can see me drilling the holes for the bolt. I'm using 3 different drill bits, a 20mm Forstner drill bit, that's the black one, a countersink drill bit and a 11mm drill bit. Here I'm checking the depth of the bolt hole, just comparing it with the thickness of my thumb, which fits to the thickness of the plywood. So I'm happy with that. The wood I'm using here is matai timber, and it was quite cheap because it's recycled timber. For the pinches I'm using lime wood, and you can see that I already marked the rough shape of the hole. As I already mentioned in the introduction, in today's video I'm going to make fairly simple shapes, so that way it's easier for you guys to get some inspiration, because every workshop has different tools, and it's also easier to make symmetrical holes if you keep it simple. In the next step I'm using a bandsaw to make the cuts, but you can use any kind of saw. Just be safe when making those cuts. The bandsaw has the advantage that you can tilt the whole table to a defined angle, so it's pretty easy to make some in cuts and stuff like this with a defined angle. Now I'm using the belt sander to achieve a round shape of the chucks. I'm not going to use a belt sander to round all the edges. I'm using a router later for that step. During this process I'm comparing the 2 holes to really achieve a symmetrical design. As you've already seen from my previous videos, I try to avoid having edges, so I'm trying to make it really smooth. That way you have to engage more, you rely less on local friction at a certain point. And that's good for your skin, but also good for training. I'm quite happy with this result, even it's a fairly simple shape. I like it. Next step, sanding the pinches. At this point, I started to round the edges of one of the pinches, but I realized that it takes too much time to do it with a belt sander. So that's where I stopped and made a couple of more cuts with the bandsaw. You might have noticed that I'm using the belt sander quite a lot. Typically, for the more complicated shapes, I'm using different carving tools and don't use the belt sander as much, typically only to get a plain bottom surface of the hold. But for the simple shapes, it's a really powerful tool. So besides having a saw and a drill, it's the most important tool. And if you want to start making climbing holds, that's definitely something to keep in mind to work with. Another comparison of the two holds. So I'm trying to achieve a symmetrical design. So therefore I have to remove a little bit of material from one or the other hold. That's it. I'm finally done with the belt sander, and in the next step I'm going to use a router to round all the edges. Working with the router on these small holes is quite tricky, so please, if you've never used a router before, don't start with climbing holes. Here you can see why it's so tricky to work with the router on those small holes. So I tilted the router a little bit and it almost instantly removed too much material. So I'm going to fix that by using an angle grinder with a sanding pad. I'm making these symmetrical climbing holes for a small indoor climbing wall I've just recently built. Since it's a small indoor climbing wall, I've chosen a symmetrical hold layout to train and tackle my weaknesses. I will make a lot of symmetrical holds, but I also ordered some from Beastmaker. I recorded the whole process of building the new small indoor climbing wall, so stay tuned, there will be a video in a couple of weeks. So that's it, 2 pairs of symmetrical holes. I know they are not as pretty as some of my other holes. They have a fairly simple shape, fairly simple design, but I like them. And let's see how they perform on the new wall.